I'm going to, take this discussion on leadership challenges a little differently because I'm going to talk about how do we use the blended learning approach in the schools, and what kind of issues and challenges are there in the Indian context for the principals. As the stage has already been laid, that the role of the leadership becomes much more critical, where they being the practitioners, they see that what are the changing context which are coming here. Keeping that in mind, the reference is here made for the blended learning, because blended learning has been the approach which had been adapted, at least in the last 2 years. We had seen that how the COVID pandemic had really changed the discourse when we are looking at the leadership into the different context. So in a way, when we are looking at the different context, one finds that the blended learning is basically combining the numerous diverse delivery mechanisms, which are based more online mode, which also are having live e-learning combinations. We have the concept of the hybrid learning as well at the same point of time. So I'll not be focusing more into the context, because as we know that the context has already been experienced, either it is the school education or the higher education. So for the leadership, the first of the major context is like, what is the context where the school is located? For instance, if we are looking at the diverse context, we are looking at the urban and rural divide, which is there, where when we are talking about using the technology in particular for using the blended approach, one finds that what kind of accessibility is there in terms of the using of the ICT, because it would also depend that the school where we are referring to is belonging to which kind of management. And since we have a huge divide of the private and the government schools in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the kind of facilities which are there, these are all going to be varied, because the accessibility to the learning in this particular context would be much more with the reference to the digital divide which is there. And the digital divide is something which is going to be focusing more in terms of the economic sphere, where from where the child is coming, whether there is a huge affordability which can be there or not. In terms of the school management, when we are looking at it, the first and the foremost challenge, which the leaders would face is, which has already been highlighted, is in the context of the human resource crunch. We already have very limited number of, teachers, and there is a huge teacher shortage which has been proved globally, and the reports are coming out. How does one address to that? uh, a very major aspect in terms of when we are looking at the digital divide is also that when we are looking at the deliverables in the education in the context of access, equity, and quality, these three parameters and these three themes are very core to the delivery mechanisms. And accessibility is something which has to be seen not only in the context of reaching to the school in particular, but also how are we really focusing it more in the context of the changes which are happening from the day-to-day perspective. And if we are talking about reaching the equity levels, which are much more in the context of not only the socioeconomic status, but also how do you refer to the gender also in particular, because there are spaces where one finds that if you are belonging to a particular group, your accessibility definitely gets much more lower. You have the multiple layers with which you have to look into it. How does the leader really address these issues as well? This is very, very critical. It's more from the practitioner's perspective when we are looking at it. When we are looking at the changing context which are there in the context of the learning environment, one finds that the learning environments have to be seen into the different contexts, and again what kind of changes which are going to be catered in terms of the skills which a leader must be looking at. And one finds that when we are looking at the role of the leadership, it has to be seen in a little wider perspective. We are not going to focus only in terms of whether the leader is able to, one, accept the changes which are there, but also how do you address it. So there are going to be a focus on the mechanisms where we are looking at the leader, which is actually building up a team, and also looking at the innovative mechanisms through which the leader is able to address the issues. So, for instance, in the during the pandemic, one has really witnessed that the school leaders have played a very vital role in continuing the whole aspect of education by also involving the community, by also looking at the different methods and mechanisms through which they are able to inculcate and bring in most of the challenges, and address most of the challenges which were being faced at the time of the pandemic. uh, when we are looking at the digital divide, because it's not only that we are using the technology for the first time, we have been using the smart schools, the use of and the integration of technology had been there since the year 2000. It's not a very new phenomenon, but yes, of course, in the last since the 2019, I must say that the way we are looking at the change in the delivery mechanisms in the pedagogical spheres are going to be addressing much more in terms of the changing context. And when we are looking at the use of the technology and the blended approaches, it also requires that there needs to be a different kind of approach where we are looking at building the capacities, not only of the teachers, but also of the leaders, that is the school principals, where these changes are again going to be seen within a particular context. It cannot be a very one kind of a formula which one is using so that you are able to make into the deliverables, but to look at it much more closely, that the role of the leader would be much more challenging in the changing context, which has been already said, that how we are looking at the different context and the changing context would continuously be making the leader on a constant ride, where they have to be much more innovative into the context. Either it is in terms of using the context where they are facing any kind of shortage of the human resources, or even when we are looking at the using of the technology, the other very major challenges that we still face, that there are certain areas where you do not have the access to the internet resources, or you're not able to use the technology up to the mark the way it is to be used. So in the nutshell, when we are looking at the leader, I think the leader has to be much more adaptable, much more also looking at the context, that how they are equipping themselves along with the team with which they are working, either they are the teaching or the non-teaching, because it requires all kinds of people to be together when we are looking at the learning environments. So in the nutshell, this is how I'll close, because